Why are we here?
Yes.
The fun, short answer is we're not really.
That's it. That's all we need now.
You can't just leave it hanging there. I mean, why are we here? You are sitting in the hand of God. And always have been and always will be. That's the good news. The rest is details. Why are we here? One more moment. If we had to turn it into a story or a myth or a allegory or metaphor or something like that, it would be as though saying a tiny fragment of the mind of God asked a question like, what would it be like to be separate and different than this? And separation was born. That it's like that little tiny fragment of God immediately got to see what it was like to have that wish granted. It's difficult to put, words immediately engender that kind of separation. When one says something like a fragment of God decided to do this, it immediately sounds like there's God and there's a tiny fragment, and they're two very separate things, and they're with separate volitions and separate. Which is why every single thing in this world, in the experience of it, is an experience of separation. And it's as though even in the instant of wondering that or asking that, like the Big Bang took place and the world was born. And that, or at least it appears to be. But can God really be fragmented? Of course not. Is there anything that can possibly be outside of divinity? Of course not. If there were, the divinity would no longer be, let's say, perfect. It would not be divine. Of course, we're running up against the limitations of these words. And so could it have really happened? Really? In actual fact? In truth? No. Which is why we get, especially when we dig into the world of non-dual language, it's why we find these phrases that say things like, it's an illusion, it's a dream. This is what that actually means. That the illusion of separation is the illusion of being here. It's the illusion of a universe of space and time. It's the illusion of a separate me. It's an illusion of all the separate things in all the ways that we can conceive of separation. And it's as though that initial split became split again and again and again and again in a billion zillion uncountable number of ways that eventually produces seemingly billions of separate individual people and planets and stars and all of it. And it's as though that initial seeming act of separation that never actually occurred gets forgotten. And so that seeming separate fragment that ends up having a seeming consciousness of its own that seems very different and separate from the other consciousnesses around it ends up being so convinced of its individuality, and that it's only in the context of that individuality that the rest of this separation seems to make any sense, and therefore becomes sort of entrenched. Like it begins to become impossible to see past all of that separation back to that original oneness. In fact, it begins to seem so preposterous that it can't even be conceived of. And it begins then to seem as though it's this separated experience that is the realness and the truth. And it seems like such a radical shift of leap of, we might even say, faith, that original oneness could actually be the truth, because it has become now to seem so spectacularly distant as to be unreachable, unfindable, and unconceivable even. And it's then that one could begin to ask a question like, well, what are we here for? How does any of this make sense? It can't make any sense except to a separated sense of self. And even there, the sense is a little only because that seeming fragment has seemed to have lost touch with its original oneness to such a degree that it can hardly conceive of what that is. So are you really here, and did it really happen? No, you've sat in the hand of God eternally and always. Is this an illusion? Yes. Why are you here? Why do you still seem to be here? Because of the persistent forgetting of that oneness.